Hey, what's going on, guys? This is TowerNumberNine, and we are coming to you this time for a special video. This is not going to be the usual content for this channel. This time, I am actually recording a video that is going to be a deck tech and showcase here. And this is going to be a special feature here for FaB Foundry. So FaB Foundry, you guys may be familiar with it, put on the recent West Coast Playtest League, which culminated in a tournament. You guys may have seen some of the games from that tournament on my Twitch or on my YouTube. You know, I've uploaded several of those. And I ultimately was able to win that tournament. I was using a Dorinthea Ironsong Warrior deck, and some of you may have seen some of those games, like I said, but I figured I was going to make a video here that was going to discuss exactly what I was doing in more detail. So this is going to be the deck breakdown for Dorinthea Ironsong of the same style that I used in the tournament. This is not the exact same deck that I used in the tournament. I actually don't have that one saved, embarrassingly enough. So this one's gone through a few little changes since, but very minor changes. It is almost exactly the same as the one that I was playing at that time, and I just wanted to do a quick review, going through kind of the deck tech, going through the strategy, and showing you how I sideboard in the different matchups. So yeah, let's get to it. So first up, we're going to go to the hero and the weapon here. So the hero, Dorinthea Ironsong, once per turn effect, when your weapon attack hits, you may attack an additional time with that weapon this turn. Now, the important thing to know about this ability is that in addition to having the ability to attack an additional time with your weapon, you also have to have something that is either going to give your first weapon attack go again, or is going to give you an extra action point or something like that, because simply having the ability to attack an additional time with that weapon this turn doesn't necessarily give you the action point that you need to do so. So the core gameplay with Dorinthea Ironsong is going to be based on lining up situations where you're going to be able to use go again effects to combine with her ability, or with Twinning Blade, a card that I'll show you later, to get not just the go again, but also the extra weapon swing and come in there with the Dawn Blade for a lot of damage. So I'll show you the Dawn Blade here. Dawn Blade is a weapon, once per turn action, 1 energy attack, coming in for 3 damage. So fairly strong. That's relatively efficient compared to some weapons, but at the same time, you do still have a problem, which is that the opponent can block this with just 1 card if they have a card that blocks for 3. However, if Dawn Blade hits and it's the second time it has hit this turn, it gets a +1 counter, which would then mean it was 1 energy for 4 damage, which is incredibly efficient and threatening. At the beginning of your end phase, though, if Dawnblade did not hit this turn, you remove all of those counters. So if you can score multiple hits in a turn with the Dawnblade, you can start building up +1 counters that can rapidly make it much harder to defend against and more powerful on the attack. But if the opponent does manage to stop you, once you have those counters built up, you will lose them. So the Dawnblade does say once per turn action attack, and you might wonder, how is it possible to attack to hit multiple times if you can only attack once per turn? And that's when we get back to Dorinthea Ironsong's hero ability with that once per turn effect. When your weapon attack hits, you may attack an additional time with that weapon this turn. So you can use that to with the Dawnblade to make it so that it's no longer a once per turn effect, and you can potentially swing a second time. And if you get that hit, you will be able to get the +1 counter on there as well. Now, another important thing to note about this is that the weapon attack does have to hit in order to enable this. So if the opponent blocks you completely, even if you have go again, you're not necessarily going to be able to swing that weapon again unless you have a Twinning Blade or something. You need to line up both the effect that gives go again and the effect that allows an additional attack to actually get 2 Dawnblade attacks in a turn. Okay. So that's the hero and that's the weapon. And so the rest of the deck is going to be based on supporting the hero and weapon and focusing on some important synergies there. So let's take a quick look over here. On this area we have the Dawnblade support cards. So all of these cards are things that are going to buff the Dawnblade. We'll see here I have 3 copies of Warrior's Valor, the 3 reds, 3 copies of Spoils of War, 8 copies of Hit and Run, 3 blues, 3 yellows, and 2 reds. And actually this is in the wrong place. I'm sorry. This should be, well, it can stay here for honorary reasons. This is not Dawnblade support. This is just a good card. Iron Song Determination here. In fact, we will move it. Let's make this a little more visually distinct. Steelblade Shunt over there, Iron Song Determination here, and Steelblade Supremacy. So like, let's take a look at some of this stuff here. So Warrior's Valor, this card used to be played like in 9 copies or something. It was one of the most commonly played cards for a warrior. So what this is your next weapon attack this turn gains +3, and if this hits, the attack gains go again for 1 energy. So, you know, there's also the yellow and blue versions. The yellow one is +2, but it pitches for 2. The blue version is just +1, but it pitches for 3. I'm only running the reds in this build, which is a little unconventional. In the past, this card would often be played even 9x. The reason that I'm only running the reds is because this card is conditional on the go again. It's if this hits, the attack gains go again. So let's say that I play this Warrior's Valor red, and then I swing my Dawnblade. So the Dawnblade is now 3 base stats +3, so it's coming in at strength 6, and if it hits, it will gain go again. And with Dorinthea's ability in there as well, if it hits, it will gain go again, and I will be able to attack an additional time. So, you know, if I come in with the Red Warrior's Valor plus Dawnblade, strength 6, go again on hit, and it will allow me to attack an additional time. So if that attack lands, I'll then be able to potentially swing again and start threatening that +1 counter, and that sounds really good. The problem is if they block you out completely with that and you aren't able to sneak in with an attack reaction or something, you're going to be in a bad spot. You're not going to be able to do anything else, and your turn is just going to end, which can be very unfortunate. Now, against some players, especially against a newer player, they might not block that fully, or they might block exactly 6 and allow you to sneak in with an attack reaction. But against a more skilled player who is familiar with the warrior matchup and trying to defend appropriately, you know, it could be that when you're coming in with this attack for 6, they're going to be blocking, even over blocking. You know, sometimes you might find it appropriate to block with like 3 cards against this, block for like 8 or 9 damage instead of just 6, and like it wastes block, but it protects you from potential attack reactions that could be played. And as a result of that, against a good player who does something like that, or who has defense reactions available that they can play for a lot of defense, or that they can play after you use an attack reaction, those are going to be situations where you might not be able to actually land that hit, and you might be in a bit of trouble. So let's put the Dawnblade back. This is still a good card, you know, this Warrior's Valor. It's still, I still have 3 copies of it in the deck, but it's no longer the core of the deck like it used to be when I was running the reds and the yellows and the blues. Instead, we're going to be using some different cards, so I'll show you one here, Spoils of War. Your same cost of 1, also a red. This one is your next weapon attack this turn gains +2 and go again. Whenever a weapon you control hits this turn, create 2 copper tokens. And it itself has go again, of course, so that you can play it without just ending your turn. So the thing about this card is the copper tokens aren't necessarily all that good. I'm not running a card. There's a card called Cash In that allows you to discard 4 copper tokens to draw 2 cards. I'm not running that in this build. I'm not actually even necessarily planning on getting hits with Spoils of War. Like, it's good if I can get them. But the thing that's so good about Spoils of War is that Spoils of War is your next weapon attack is going to get that go again, and it's not conditional on hitting. So if you compare to Warrior's Valor is going to give you 1 more stat, but Warrior's Valor only grants that go again if the attack actually hits. So because Spoils of War is going to give you the go again no matter what, even if they stop that first attack and you don't get Dorinthea's ability and you don't get the second Dawnblade swing, Dorinthea's ability is also on hit. When your weapon attack hits, you may attack an additional time. Even if they stop that attack and prevent that ability from going off and you're not going to get the second Dawnblade swing, you're going to have the opportunity to come in and do some other stuff that is going to potentially threaten them. And I'll be showing that stuff shortly. But even if your weapon attack gets stopped, there's other things that you can do to follow up that are going to be pretty dangerous. Then this card, Hit and Run, is kind of an in-between option. So this is the yellow Hit and Run that I'm showing here. It's 0 cost. Your next weapon attack this turn gains go again. If you've attacked with a weapon this turn, your next attack this turn gains +2. So I'm often just playing this for the first effect, where it's just giving my next weapon attack go again. Like Spoils of War, it's going to be unconditional go again. Unlike Spoils of War, the stats in this case are conditional. So Warrior's Valor is going to give me the stats unconditionally, but the go again is conditional. Hit and Run is going to give me the go again unconditionally, but the stats are conditional. And Spoils of War is going to give me both the stats and the go again unconditionally, and is just sort of the best option of the 3. However, it is a little bit less efficient. You know, you are getting only 2 attack power out of a red instead of 3, and you can only run 3 copies because it is an M rarity card that only has a red version. There's no yellow or blue spoils of war. So that being said, this hit and run sometimes lets you set up really cool plays. So if you already have Go Again on your weapon from some other source, then you can swing with it, then play hit and run to get Go Again and the stats, then potentially swing again, and then potentially even do another thing after that. It's not even all that uncommon to get 3 or more attacks in a turn out of this deck, which is very strong compared to some. So hit and run, very solid card. Also, all of these cards block for 3, which is a good number to block for, and all of them are relatively cheap, which is important because the deck does not have a ton of pitch. Actually, more than half the cards in the deck are reds, and I think I have either 15 or 16 blues most of the time, and you know, having cards that can be played for a cheap price is going to be pretty useful when you are trying to run that aggressive cost curve. Okay, then in terms of the other Dawnblade buffs, we have 3 copies here of the Steelblade Supremacy. So this card is until end of turn, target weapon gains +2 attack, and whenever this weapon hits, draw a card, and it has Go Again. This card's also a red. So this one is great when paired up with some of this other stuff. So like, you know, you might do a turn where it's like, okay, I'm going to do Steelblade Supremacy, and I'm going to do Warrior's Valor, and I'm going to swing. And maybe you pitched a blue to do this, and then you spent all 3 of your resources. The cool thing about this is this attack is now coming in for 8, and the card draw on hit from Steelblade Supremacy, you can use that to pay for future attacks. So if you're doing a normal attack with Go Again, you want to have saved at least 1 energy after everything is done and you've played any reactions or whatever, so that you'll still have the energy to actually do the second attack that you're trying to get. But with Steelblade Supremacy, the fact that you drew a card often means that you can pitch the card that you just drew to generate the energy that you need to make your second attack. So it can be really cool. Also, its ability applies to the entire turn. It's not just to that attack. So if I'm coming in here with my Dawnblade for 5, and if it hits, draw a card, and my opponent cannot stop it, and I hit them and then get to make a second attack, I still have the +2, and whenever this weapon hits, draw a card on the second swing, and that is a very cool thing to be able to do. Okay, so that's Steelblade Supremacy for you, and then I have a single copy of the Ironsong Determination here. This card I used to run at 3 copies, and then I saw some interesting information from some of the more experienced players in New Zealand. And New Zealand players are, you know, they've been doing tournaments in New Zealand because that country has had a very good response to the virus situation. But this Ironsong Determination, I was originally running it at like 2 or 3 copies, and I've actually cut down to 1 after hearing some guidance from Matt Rogers, one of the best players in the game right now. And he said that this card can be kind of a trap. It gives you +1 attack and dominate. So dominate is going to be, or it gives your weapon +1 attack and dominate until end of turn. Dominate is that the opponent can only block with 1 card from hand. And that sounds really good. The problem is that if you use Dominate too early, they're still going to be able to stop your attack, because even though they can only block with 1 card from hand, they can still play defense reactions from Arsenal, and they can still use equipment. So let's say that I attack with Ironsong Determination, and I'm coming in here for, you know, let's say it's just 4 with Dominate. And you might think, oh, this is great. You know, 4 with Dominate, they can only block with 1 card. 1 card usually only blocks for 2 or 3. This is going to guarantee me a hit. But then they block with 1 card that blocks for 3, plus a piece of equipment that blocks for 1. And even though they only used 1 card from hand, they were still able to stop your attack. You typically want to only use this card if you think your opponent is vulnerable to it, or if their armor and defense reactions have been worn down a lot, which is going to be later on in the game. So as a result, I only play 1 copy of this, and I tend to pitch it if I draw it early, unless I see what seems like a great situation. Because by pitching it early on, I'm trying to set myself up for the late game. Once I've run my opponent out of a lot of their tricks, then I'm going to have the opportunity to get this and play it when that Dominate is going to be really impactful. So I'm only playing the 1 copy, and I do tend to pitch it if I draw it early. The goal of that being to save the Dominate for when it's really good, which is when someone is running out of defensive equipment and of defense reaction cards. So only 1 copy of that, but it can be important. And so these cards are very core. These are things that I'm going to be playing essentially all the time. I've thought before about potentially making some cut or change to get a 3rd red hit and run the full 9. Currently just running the 8, but that's something to consider for the future. Okay, so those are the Dawnblade buffs. So these cards are things that I'm going to be playing with my Dawnblade in order to give my weapon attack go again, so that I can try to get the hit and set up the combination of Dorinthea's ability, allowing me the additional attack, and one of these to give the weapon attack go again, so that I can then make that swing. Okay, so in addition to those, I have a bunch of attack reactions. So this top row here, these are going to be my attack reactions. So let's take a look. Glint the Quicksilver, target weapon attack gains go again. If the defending hero has defended with a card from their hand this chain link, draw a card. This is really a strong card. This is one of the best cards Warrior has to offer. So this is another way to get go again on your weapon. And additionally, if the opponent blocked you, you're going to get a card draw out of it, so it's going to replace itself. And it's a unconditional go again. It doesn't require you to hit. So if you play this to get go again, and then they play some defense reaction and stop your attack, and you can't swing the Dawnblade again, you can still do something else. Really strong. You know, in some ways, this can be grouped with the other cards that I was looking at earlier as Dawnblade buffs and things to allow multiple attacks. On top of all that, it blocks for 3 and pitches for 3. So it's a great card effect. It has the best pitch you can have in the game, and it's also a strong blocker. This card is an all-star. You know, I would definitely play the maximum number of copies of it. It's just great. Then moving on, we're going to have the rest of the attack reactions are mostly damage oriented, so we have multiple different types. I'm running 3 copies of Ironsong Response Red. This card can be really good because it costs 0. And so it's if the defending hero has defended with a card from their hand this chain link, target weapon attack gains +3. So this is a nice trick because you can play it even when you don't have any resources left, or you would need your last resource to potentially do the second swing. And so your opponent might see a lot of the attack reactions in this game are going to cost 1 or more. So your opponent might see, oh, he doesn't have the resources to do it. To do something and buff up his attack, but this Ironsong response is going to let you do it anyway. The downside is that it only is going to work if the opponent has defended with a card from their hand this chain link. So they have to have done that first, and if you can't actually even play this card if the opponent has not defended with a card from their hand. So I have 3 of the red ones for the +3. +3 attack for a card is typically the deal that you're going to get with an attack reaction. And so +3 attack for a card and it costs 0 is very strong. Then I have one of the, I have 1 blue, which is going to be just the +1. Okay. And the blue, you know, I'm usually going to pitch this. I might block with it. And, but sometimes if the opponent blocks the exact amount, like if I do a red Warrior's Valor coming in for 6, opponent blocks for 6, this can be just the card I need to sneak in there, get that extra point of damage in over their block, and enable my on-hit effect. So then next up we have Razer Reflex. This is a classic card, really strong card. It has 2 different modes. On one of them it buffs a sword or dagger weapon attack for +3, and it costs 1 to do so. On the other mode it applies to an attack action card with cost 1 or less, and gives it +3, and if this hits the attack gains go again. And so both of those modes are really strong. The first mode is great with the weapon, and the second mode is usable with a lot of the generic attacks that I'm running in this deck, which I will be getting to later on in the video. But this card is great for its versatility, where it can buff almost any attack that I'm doing. The only attack that I have in this deck that I can't buff with Razer Reflex is Command and Conquer. And everything else that I'm doing attack-wise, this is going to be something that's functional. So sometimes, you know, I might have a turn where I'm trying to do an attack with my generic attacks instead of my weapon, and cards like Ironsong Response aren't very good because they only apply to weapon attacks. Razer Reflex has the versatility to be relevant in both situations, so it's quite a strong card. The one downside of this card is that it does only block for 2 instead of 3, so it is a little bit weaker on the defense. That's something to consider, you know, just something to take note of. Is going to make it that little bit worse. In some situations, but still very strong. And I prefer this to a lot of the actual in-class warrior attack reactions. Okay, next up we have Singing Steelblade. This is a very, very strong card. So this card costs 1. It only gives +1 to your weapon, so you might think, oh, that's really bad, 1 for 1, you know, that Razer Reflex was 1 for 3. Like, yes, this is a yellow, and yes, it blocks for 3, but 1 for 1 is still bad. However, it has reprise. If the defending hero has defended with a card from their hand this chain link, search your deck for an attack reaction card, banish it face up, then shuffle your deck. You may play it this chain link. So the way that this is usually going to work is you are going to use it actually with one of these cards that I just showed you. So if you play Singing Steelblade and search your deck for a Ironsong Response, You can find a red Iron Song response, have that be the card that you pull with Singing Steelblade, and then play that for 0. Reprise will be relevant because you had to have Reprise to play the Singing Steelblade in the first place. And then Singing Steelblade becomes a 1 cost for +4 reaction, which is above curve and very threatening. Having 1 card give you +3 is so common that a lot of people will overblock you by exactly 3 if they think that if they think you might have an attack reaction. So this Singing Steelblade allowing you to come in there and hit for 4 instead is going to be really strong. Okay. So route is a heavy. Oh yeah, and I'm sorry. I actually want to discuss one more thing with Singing Steelblade, or 2 more things really. You can pull any attack reaction from this. It doesn't have to be Iron Song response. So another great move: if you attack and someone blocks exactly enough, play the Singing Steelblade, and then search your deck for an attack reaction card. Find that Glint the Quicksilver. Use that. You get the go again. You get the +1 damage, and you get the card draw. That can be a really annoying thing to do. That can be just what you need if the opponent blocks exactly your level of damage, and you don't have a go again. You play that Singing Steelblade, give yourself the go again, give yourself the +1 damage to get in and allow the second attack, and get a card draw off of Glint for your trouble. Very strong. And then lastly, I want to highlight this card, Twinning Blade. This card is basically the same as Dorinthea's ability, where it's going to allow you to attack an additional time with your sword. But unlike Dorinthea's ability, Twinning Blade can be played without needing a hit. It's an attack reaction. And so there's some situations where you may actually want to use Singing Steelblade to fetch Twinning Blade and give yourself that additional attack. For instance, if I play the Spoils of War that I was showing earlier, where I'm going to have an unconditional go again, my opponent heavily blocks. Like, let's say they block with 3 cards, they're blocking 9 to my 5, and then I can play Singing Steelblade. Even if I got the Iron Song response to go up by +4, I would still get stopped. But if I play Singing Steelblade and use that to fetch a Twinning Blade, I'm going to be able to use my unconditional go again to make another weapon swing. And with them already having used so many resources to defend against the first one, they might not be in a position to make a good defense against my second attack. So that's Twinning Blade. Very cool card in my opinion. A lot of fun to play with. And also can be good with Singing Steelblade. Singing Steelblade can of course be used to fetch any of the attack reactions. I'm going to get into some of the heavier ones. You can fetch those, they all need a lot of resources. So Route here. Route is target weapon attack gains +3. It has Reprise. If the defending hero has defended with a card from their hand this chain link, you may return target non-equipment defending card to its owner's hand. So that's going to cost 2, and it gives the weapon attack +3. And then returning a non-equipment defending card to its owner's hand can be a critical way to close out the game. So for example, if the opponent has blocked with 2 cards from hand against a Dawnblade attack that's coming in for 3, that's often an overblock that's going to keep them safe if they're really low. But if you play Route and give it +3 and send one of those back to hand, they don't have the opportunity to actually block with it again, because the blocking step is before the step where you're going to be playing attack and defense reactions. So that Route could sneak in there in a situation where the opponent can't really do anything about it, and allow you to get some damage through even an overblock. You can also use it against defense reactions, but it's risky to do so in some situations because the opponent can just replay the defense reaction after it's sent back to their hand. However, it can be useful to use Route against more expensive defense reactions because they'll have to pay the cost again to play it. So like if someone plays an Unmovable, which costs 3, and you Route their Unmovable, they're going to have to pitch another 3 resources to replay it if they want to try and use that again, and that could be really detrimental to them. So Route, strong card. You'll note that it's only 1 copy. And the reason for that is because its high expense in a deck that has a lot of red makes it kind of not always a card that I'm going to actually be able to play. And because I'm not always able to play it, it is going to be something that I'm going to save for later events. And like the Iron Song Determination that I showed earlier, this is often one that I'm going to try to pitch early so that I'm going to draw it later in the game when I'm likely to have more resources. Because I will have pitched more blues, so my cost curve is going to lean towards more energy later on in the game. But additionally, later on in the game, this card can be more crushing because, if it's like turn 1 and I swing and the opponent blocks with 2 cards and I Route to send one of the cards back and deal 3 damage, that's kind of whatever. But if it's, turn 15 and the opponent is at 3 life, that play is potentially lethal, and the Route becomes much more threatening and relevant in that situation. So I like pitching this card and then trying to use it later on in the game, maybe even for lethal. Also, one other thing that I'll say about this, Rout can be played in a sufficiently important situation without reprise. Like maybe the opponent didn't defend with something from hand, but they played a defense reaction from arsenal and you just need the stats to get in. It's totally fine to do that. I've done it many times. Sometimes you just have to play it for the stats. Okay, next up, Overpower. Overpower is another card that is a big attack reaction. This one costs 3. I like playing the blue version of this card. Similarly to Rout, I like pitching this card early on and then playing it later on in the game. So this is going to come in for 2, and with a reprise, if the defending hero is defended with a card from their hand, it gets an additional 2. So then that's going to be a very strong play. It's going to allow me to inflict 4 damage for 3. So 4 damage for 3 isn't that efficient compared to 3 damage for 0, but the fact that it's 4 damage, again, means that it's going to come over somebody who overblocked by 3, and that's going to be potentially strong. This card I often use as a pitch or a block, but then if it does get to the late game, it has that opportunity to come in and hit an opponent even through an overblock to try to deliver some damage late on when it's important. Next up, we're going to have the blue Out for Blood. This card costs 1 energy, and it only gives the weapon attack +1. Again, doesn't seem great, but it is a blue. It does block for 3, and with reprise, if the defending hero has defended with a card from their hand this chain link, your next attack this turn gains +1. So if the opponent blocks for the exact amount, you can play this Out for Blood and sneak in over their block and buff your next attack by 1 as well, making it harder to defend against the next one. And this, another note is that this doesn't just apply to weapon attacks, it also applies to attack cards that you might play. So I might attack with my sword, they overblock me, but I have an unconditional go again, so I play an Out for Blood, and then I might follow up with Command and Conquer, now hitting for 7 instead. Sometimes that 1 point of extra damage from Out for Blood can be pretty key. Okay, so then we have Twinning Blade. I showed you this earlier. This is basically the card that is going to allow you to have Dorinthea's effect as a reaction instead of a thing that requires you to get a hit. Useful card, especially good when paired with unconditional go-agains, and especially good when paired with the cards that are going to give you buffs for your Dawnblade or with a Dawnblade counter. So because the Dawnblade will lose its counters if the opponent blocks it completely, if I play like hit and run, swing with the Dawnblade that has a +1 counter, so coming in for 4 with go again, my opponent might block that with multiple cards. Maybe they're even going to block that with 3 cards, try to like heavily overblock it and make sure that I can't sneak in with an attack reaction to keep my Dawnblade going, but I can play Twinning Blade then and swing a second time for 4, and if they can't stop that one, I'm going to keep my counter, and depending on what else I have, I might even do more attacks after that. So this is a way to get more attacks in. It also pitches, it has yellow pitch, and it blocks for 3, which is nice. And it's going to be pretty cool for trying to threaten the opponent, especially if you have either one of the full turn buff cards, like the ones in this deck are Singing Steelblade, or I'm sorry, Steelblade Supremacy and Iron Song Determination, or if you have a counter on your Dawnblade, that's when this Twinning Blade is going to really shine. Okay, so those are my attack reactions. You'll note this is a lot. This deck has 2, 4, 6, 7, 10, 13, 17. Yeah, this deck has 20 attack reactions. And actually, in some matchups, I put in a second route and go to 21. So that is a very large number of attack reactions, but attack reactions are one of Warrior's class focuses. And having a lot of them helps you be more unpredictable and more threatening. There's just a lot of stuff that I can potentially be doing on any given attack, and the opponent really has to think, like, what is he doing? If I block exactly the right amount, is he going to have one of his mini attack reactions to sneak in and trigger his on-hit effect? Do I have enough defense to weather this? And the fact that those attack reactions are keeping the opponent guessing is a really appealing part of playing Warrior. But even with all these attack reactions, even with 20 attack reactions, all these cards to buff the Dawnblade, sometimes your opponent is going to stop you. That's just the way of the game. Sometimes they do the big overblock, they have a big defense reaction, they have an unmovable in arsenal, something big happens and they're going to be able to shut you down. What do you do then? So that's the big question, and that's actually how this deck most evolved. Early on, I had more copies of Warrior's Valor, as I was discussing, and I was more relying on if this hits, the attack gains go again. But because I've shifted to these cards, the spoils and the hit and runs, and glint and stuff, that's going to give me the more unconditional go again, I have more potential follow-ups. And let's take a look at some of those follow-up options, and I'll show you how that's going to work for me. Okay, so first up, we have we have a lot of generic attacks, really, and All the follow-ups here are generic attacks except for the good old energy potion, and I'll get into more details on each of these. But the key thing to know about these cards is that if I do an unconditional go again, come in with my Dawnblade, and the opponent stops me, I'm now going to have the option. I still have that action point because of the go again, and I have to have something to do with it. And these cards are going to be the things that I'm going to try to do with that action point. So first up, we have Enlightened Strike. Very powerful and versatile attack. One of the best cards in the game. So this card is 0 cost, strength 5, blocks for 3. As an additional cost to play it, you have to put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. That means you can't play this if you only have it in your hand. But you get to choose an effect. Either you draw a card, you give it +2, coming in for 7 damage instead of just 5, or it gets go again. So all of those modes are potentially good. And all of them can be threatening. So maybe you're going to be, maybe you're going to play this. Maybe you do an unconditional Dawnblade attack, and then the opponent stops it. Or maybe you do a Dawnblade attack with unconditional go again, your opponent stops it, and then you play an E-Strike for 7. Maybe you're going to lead off with an E-Strike 5 go again, and try to get your opponent to spend some of their resources blocking against that before you do a big Dawnblade attack, and try to sneak in with an attack reaction and do things there. Maybe you have a Quicken token, and this is going to have go again, and you decide to use the card draw mode with it so that you're coming in for 5 with go again and drawing a card to replace the one that you have to put on the bottom of your deck. Maybe it's the end of your turn and you want to draw your top card and potentially put it in the arsenal. There's a lot of options with this card, and its flexibility is really strong. So yeah, Enlightened Strike, really good option. Snatch here. This is 0 cost, strength 4. If it hits, draw a card. This one is a great thing to do at the end of a turn. So you can come in here for the Snatch at strength 4. 4 is an awkward number to block because most cards only block for 3, except for defense reactions. So usually they're going to need more than one thing to fully stop this, and if it hits, you'll draw a card. Now, drawing a card isn't as valuable in this game as it is in some other games, because the way that the hand refills to maximum size at the end of each turn means that drawing a card, if you're just going to refill anyway, might actually do nothing. But if this card draw is going to allow you to put a card in arsenal before you draw your hand, or it's going to, draw an instant like Remembrance that you can then play before the turn ends and then you redraw, or it's going to, your Snatch has go again from some other source. Maybe you have the Razer Reflex buffing it up. This Razer Reflex can give attack action cards with cost 1 or less +3, and if this hits, the attack gains go again. So maybe your Snatch attack has that, and you are going to hit at strength 7, and then get go again, and the card that you drew could be the card that you play next, or a card that you're going to pitch to fuel your next attack. If it hits, draw a card isn't always on, but it can be very strong under the right circumstances. I'm only playing the red version of this. There are yellow and blue versions of this, but I'm only playing the red version because I really want to hit at strength 4. Because the yellow version coming in at strength 3 is going to be easily stopped by just a single card from hand. And so I really only want the version that's going to make them have to use a defense reaction or use multiple cards to block or whatever. All right, next up, Scar for a Scar. Great card, 0 cost, strength 4, only blocks for 2. Now, that's also a downside of Snatch. But when you play a Scar for a Scar, if you have less life than your opponent, gains go again. So that can actually be really effective. You can play this card, and come in for 4 at the start of your turn if you're less life than your opponent. And if the opponent defends against it, that's a 1 card out of their hand that you're going to be able to have other stuff. You're going to be able to have your other stuff later on in the turn come in with less defensive options. So this can be a really strong card under the right circumstances. And even if you have more life than your opponent, you can still play this at the end. So often, if I have less life, I want to lead off with this card in order to threaten the opponent at the start of the turn and force them to either take some damage immediately or block and potentially weaken themselves for the future attack. But I might also be in a situation where I want to do a hit and run, swing my Dawnblade, and then follow up with Scar for a Scar later on in the turn. And this has the flexibility to do both of those as long as you have less life than your opponent. But even if you have more life than your opponent or equal life to your opponent, you can still play it at the end of the chain just to throw out some damage. So very strong card, very aggressive card. Next up, Ravenous Rabble. This is an unusual one. Reveal the top card of your deck. Ravenous Rabble gets -X, where X is the pitch value of the card revealed this way. Go again. So this comes in at strength 5 in theory, but in practice, because you'll always, at least in this deck, you're always going to have a pitch value of at least 1. And for that reason, the real like maximum strength of this is actually 4, not 5. And if you're unlucky and hit a blue, you're going to come in only at strength 2. However, this has unconditional go again, so you can always play this and still do other stuff in the turn, as long as you have energy or other cards to use. And additionally, the fact that it reveals the top card can sometimes be useful. You know, I've had a game where it's like, okay, I reveal my top card with Ravenous Rabble, and I see that it's something that is going to be useful if I draw this turn, or useful to put into Arsenal. So then I can use like this Glint the Quicksilver that's going to give me a card draw, or Easter I can choose to draw a card instead of getting the +2 damage, so that I can get that card, put it in Arsenal, and be prepared for the next turn. The one downside, of course, is that revealing the top card is also going to give some information to your opponent, but overall this is still a cool aggressive card, allowing you to do multiple attacks in a turn. And yeah, quite flexible. One note is that if you have multiple of these in your hand, then you will want to either play all of them or not play all of them, probably depending on what pitch value the card has. So let's say I have 2 Ravenous Rabble in hand. I play the first one and it hits a red pitch card. That's great. It's going to come in for 4. That's the maximum damage. I'll play the second one immediately to do another 4 with go again. But if I play the Ravenous Rabble and it hits a blue card, so it's only 2 damage with go again, I'm probably going to save the second one for a later time. Or maybe, maybe I'm going to pitch it, maybe I'm going to put it in Arsenal, but it's usually not going to be as valuable to play it again if I know that it's not going to come in for the full damage. So that's just a little bit of tech there with respect to Ravenous Rabble. Now we have Command and Conquer. Command and Conquer and E-Strike are 2 of the most valuable cards right now. They're very strong neutral M's. So M is Majestic rarity, and it is the highest non-legendary, non-fabled rarity. And as a result of that, the E-Strike and Command and Conquer, being both rare and generic, are highly sought after and valuable cards. So if you open one of these, congratulations, you pulled a valuable card. Command and Conquer costs 2, comes in for 6 damage. Defense reactions can't be played to its chain link, and if it hits a hero, destroy all cards in their arsenal. Because a common tactic, especially against Warrior, is to put defense reactions in Arsenal, this card can be a great threat, and it goes really well when paired with those unconditional go-agains and weapon swings. So like a sample thing that I might want to do is, let's say I play Spoils of War, swing my Dawnblade, I'm coming in for 5 damage with go again. My opponent might block that, like let's say they block that with 2 or 3 cards. Then if I can get the energy for it, I can follow it up using the go again to play Command and Conquer. Coming in at strength 6, the opponent can't use any defense reactions they might have, and if it hits, it will destroy any cards they have in Arsenal. So this is going to be a huge threat to them if they have a defense reaction in Arsenal, and depending on how many resources they may have invested to stop my first attack, it's possible that they actually won't be able to prevent this from getting in. So this can be really strong, and one of the best things about it also is that there's no way under many circumstances for your opponent to avoid losing some tempo. So if you play a E-Strike for 7 damage, the opponent could decide, whatever, I'm gonna block 7 damage with my face, take 7, and keep my whole hand and my card in Arsenal and throw out a huge attack on my next turn. Command and Conquer, you almost always are going to remove at least 1 card from your opponent, because either they get hit and lose their card in Arsenal, or they block with probably multiple cards and lose those cards for next turn. Now, in some cases, the opponent could have a lot of equipment that they're using to block against this, and use that to avoid taking a bunch of damage. But much of the time, Command and Conquer is going to take at least 1 card away from your opponent and therefore disrupt their tempo, which can be very effective. It's also throwing out a fair chunk of damage, and the fact that it can potentially destroy stuff in Arsenal is very threatening. Really the only card in the game that can do that, though there is, I believe, a Guardian card that can send a card from Arsenal to the bottom of the deck. However, that effect is a lot weaker because the opponent often will just be able to play the card in Arsenal, since that card does not restrict their defense reactions. So Command and Conquer, very strong card, kind of a counter to one of Warrior's main weaknesses, which is defense reactions in Arsenal. So really very synergistic with the rest of the deck, especially given the unconditional go-again attack pattern. All right, so next we have Flock of the Featherwalkers. This is a complicated card, costs 1. As an additional cost to play Flock of the Featherwalkers, reveal a card in your hand with cost 1 or less. And it creates a Quicken Aura token with, when you play an attack action card or attack with a weapon, destroy Quicken, and then the attack gains go again. So this is going to allow you to threaten some damage. It will and it threatens 5 damage, which is a fair chunk of damage, and it does so also while creating this token that is going to buff up your next turn. So on your next turn, you're going to have that quickened aura token, which is going to allow you to make an attack, make your first attack or weapon have go or weapon swing have go again, and that's going to allow you to have a more aggressive next turn. One cool note is that you can chain multiple of these together. So if you do a Flock of the Featherwalkers and then you have that quicken token, if you have either an action point that turn because you gave the Flock of the Featherwalkers go again, or you're waiting to the next turn and you have the quicken token waiting, you can then play another Flock of the Featherwalkers. It will have go again from the first quicken token, and then it will give a quicken token itself to give your next attack go again, and that can be really aggressive. The big downside of this card is that because you have to reveal a card in your hand with cost 1 or less, and you have to do that after you pitch, you cannot play this card if you only have it and one other card in hand, because if you were to save the card in your hand to reveal, you won't have it to be pitched, and if you were to pitch the card, you won't have something to reveal. If you do have another energy source, though, like the Fyendal Spring Tunic or the Energy Potion, you can use that to allow you to use the Flock of the Featherwalkers with only 2 cards. So, solid card. It's kind of a mix between a setup card and an aggressive card where it's throwing out some damage and it's also setting you up for a bigger turn in the future. One downside of it is that it's 5 damage without a relevant on-hit effect, so sometimes the opponent is just going to say, okay, 5 damage, I'll just take it, and I'll try to diminish how good his next turn is by doing a big turn of my own and making him block, and hopefully that's going to mitigate that quicken token somewhat. All right, and then the last thing that I like to do after a potential unconditional go again is play an energy potion. So energy potion pitches for 3, costs 0. Unfortunately, it cannot block. So this is a big downside. It cannot block at all. And because it can't block at all, this is a risky card to play, and I sideboard one of my copies out in some matchups where blocking is extra important. But if I have played this, I can destroy it as an instant to gain 2 energy, which can be extremely useful. You know, let's say I draw an all-red hand. Normally, that might be a hand where I'm not going to be able to be as aggressive, but if I've played out an energy potion, I can use that to fuel my turn and still do a lot of damage. Similarly, I can potentially use it to play some big attack reaction that the opponent's not thinking I'll be able to support. I can use it even to gain energy to play that Flock of the Featherwalkers if I only have 2 cards in hand, or even play energy to use for Arcane Barrier to defend myself against a Runeblade or a Wizard. So this can be really good. You know, sometimes you're going to want to pitch it for the 3 energy, but if you can get a chance to instead play it for the 2 energy, that's going to be a very desirable play. So Energy Potion, really strong card in the right circumstances. Doesn't block, which is a downside, but despite that downside, it can still be pretty solid. Okay, so those were the Dawnblade buffs, the attack reactions, and the generic attacks and energy potions, which I like playing after I use one of those unconditional go-agains. Now, the only other 2 cards that are in my main deck normally are those 2 copies of Steelblade Shunt. So this pitches for 3, 1 cost defense reaction. If this defends a weapon attack, deal 1 damage to the attacking hero. And this is a really strong card in the right circumstance, and the right circumstance is that your opponent is low on life. If your opponent goes down to 1 life and you play a Steelblade Shunt, they're dead unless they have a instant that is going to heal them or something. The interesting thing about Steelblade Shunt is that you can't block against this damage. It's unblockable because it's just an effect and it doesn't have the normal opportunity to block that you would with an attack. And because of that, this Steelblade Shunt is going to be really strong and threatening under the right circumstances, and is going to allow you to close out the game when an opponent gets down to 1 life, or even, you know, maybe the opponent's at 2 life and you have both of them in your hand, you can get them that way. And I even had a game actually in the tournament that I was using an earlier version of this deck in, where I had 3 copies of Steelblade Shunt and a blue card, and my opponent was at 3 life, and I pitched the blue card, hit him with all 3 shunts, and that was the game. So this card is not only some good defense, but it can also be a way to close out the game when the opponent is low on life. The downside of it is it has 2 downsides. One of them is that you only get the damage if your opponent is attacking with a weapon. It doesn't work against cards. But the other downside is that it does cost 1. So often you're going to want to try to play this with energy that you've saved up on your tunic so that you don't have to pitch another card to play it, because pitching to play it is not that exciting. Unless it's killing them, of course, in which case it's fine. It's going to win the game. So Steelblade Shunt, strong card. I usually only play 2 blue copies of this by default. And the reason that I say that is that when I'm playing the 2 blue copies of Steelblade Shunt, this is going to allow me to have a little bit of defense, but usually I'm going to try to pitch this early, and then I'll be drawing it later on in the game, hopefully when my opponent is low on life and that damage can potentially finish them off. So that's Steelblade Shunt. I have 2 copies of that. So that's the default build here. And as you can see, this is very aggressive. I'm only playing 2 defensive cards, and even the 2 defensive cards that I'm playing are kind of in there to try to kill the opponent. I do have fairly solid block because a lot of my, all those warrior cards that I'm playing are blocking for 3. But at the same time, I have 3 copies of Snatch, blocks for 2, 3 copies of Razer Reflex, blocks for 2, 3 Scars, 3 Rabbles, those block for 2, the Flocks block for 2, and the Energy Potions can't block. So I have a fair amount of cards that are weaker on defense as well. This is definitely a pretty aggressive deck, but I like trying to be the aggressive player and kind of have control of the pace of the game with the strong attack reactions and Dawnblade buffs and everything that a warrior can put together. So this is the basic deck. And then I'm going to go over the equipment here, and then we'll start discussing the sideboard. So equipment is very basic. We are going to play the old standard items here of Arcanite Skullcap. If you have less life than your opponent, Skullcap gains +1 and Arcane Barrier 3. This is basically only played for physical armor. The Arcane Barrier is mostly useless. The reason for that is that the only class where Arcane Barrier 3 is really good would be against a Wizard, but Wizard starts with less life than you, so the fact that you only have the Arcane Barrier when you're less life than your opponent is a major weakness, especially because Wizard also has better timing control. And just as a result of those factors, it's going to be pretty difficult to find a situation where you're actually getting that Arcane Barrier 3 in a good way against a Wizard. So then we have the Find All Spring Tunic here. This is a strong item, just a item that you're typically going to be using actually you use this in every matchup. And at the end of your turn, at the start of your turn, if Find All Spring Tunic has less than 3 energy counters, you may put an energy counter on it. As an instant, remove all 3 counters from the tunic to gain 1 energy. You can also block for 1, but it does have Blade Break, which means that it will be destroyed afterwards, so it's a very desperate block. But you want to use the energy that you've stored up with the tunic to typically play either the Steelblade Shunt or the Flock of the Featherwalkers, where having the 1 energy from the tunic means that you can play them without having to pitch an additional card, which will make them much more efficient. But you can also use it for a wide range of other things, or just as like, okay, I have this energy, I need 1 more energy, well, there it is. So that card mostly used for its energy, and in a desperate situation used to block one point of damage. Then Brave Forge Bracers Warrior Legendary Equipment. Once per turn action, for 1 energy, your next weapon attack this turn gains +1. Activate this ability only if a weapon you control has hit this turn. Go again. It also blocks for 2 with Battle Worn, so it can block for 2 once and then again for 1. So the reason this can be so good is you get in a situation where it's like, okay, I played my Warrior's Valor, I swung and hit my opponent, and now if I have the energy to do this, I can pay 1 energy, give my next weapon attack +1, and then swing for 4 instead of 3. And because 4 is such a critical number, it's going to be a situation where now my opponent will have to block with a defense reaction or multiple cards or a card and a piece of equipment or whatever it is. And that's just going to be that extra bit of threat and that extra bit of defense my opponent has to commit to it. And if they don't block it fully, I'm going to hit and get that Dawnblade token, which is going to buff me for the future. So this is a quite annoying card to make it just that extra bit more difficult for an opponent to defend against you. Pretty solid card. And last but not least, for the equipment, we have the Refraction Bolters. When your weapon attack hits, you may destroy Refraction Bolters. If you do, the attack gains Go Again. So this also has Battle Worn to block for 1. Now, typically, you do want to try to have used that 1 block before you actually engage the bolters, because when you use the bolters, they will be destroyed. So you want to have already found an opportunity to have blocked beforehand so that you don't waste the 1 armor on there. But if you find a sufficiently good situation and you're like, okay, time to, I've put a lot of pressure on my opponent, I got the hit, my opponent doesn't have much defense left, time to use these bolters, get Go Again, and exert even more pressure. It can be very strong, but you gotta save it for the right moment. 1 card that this combines really well with is the Steelblade Supremacy. So let's say I do Steelblade Supremacy, coming in for Strength 5, and if it hits, draw a card. And I swing, my opponent blocks, I play an attack reaction and manage to sneak through. That would be a great opportunity to use the Refraction Bolters, because allowing me to get Go Again and potentially make another weapon attack is much more valuable when my weapon has +2 attack, and whenever this hits, draw a card for the entire turn. So those 2 make a good pair, but that's not the only situation where I would use it. That's just maybe one of the most favorable ones. Then I have two other pieces of equipment that are essentially sideboard cards for two specific matchups only. One of them is Null-Rune Hood. Doesn't block at all, but it has Arcane Barrier 1, allowing you to pay 1 energy to prevent 1 arcane damage. And then the Null-Rune Gloves are exactly the same, except they take the arm slot instead of the head slot. And so basically, against a Runeblade, I'm going to put on the Null-Rune Hood instead of the Arcanite Skullcap, which is going to allow me to block their Rune Chance for 1 energy. That's a very important interaction in the Runeblade matchup. You need to have Arcane Barrier 1, specifically Arcane Barrier 1. 2 or 3 is actually worse than 1, because you would have to use them inefficiently against Rune Chant tokens, since Rune Chant tokens are going to be a bunch of sources of 1 damage, where you want to pay 1 for 1. And if you had Arcane Barrier 2, you could pay 2 to prevent 2, but because each source is only preventing 1, you've essentially doubled the price that you're paying to block each source, and that is not efficient at all. So you want to equip this Null-Rune Hood against a Runeblade. And against a Wizard, you're also going to put on these Null-Rune Gloves, and so that will put you up to Arcane Barrier 2, allowing you to block that little bit more of their attacks and try to stave off some of the arcane damage that's headed your way. And that doesn't seem like a lot of defense against Wizard, and it really isn't, but you will be bolstered by some of the sideboard cards that I'll be showing you shortly. So let's get I've kind of set out the main deck, the main game plan. You know, you want to be using these cards for go again, preferably unconditional go again, coming in with the Dawnblade swing, then you either using reactions to get in and then make another Dawnblade swing with Dorinthea's ability and try to get that counter, or throwing out one of these other attacks or potions or whatever after they stop you, so that you're not wasting your go again. And this type of attack pattern can be really difficult to defend against, because the opponent just doesn't know. They're like, okay, you know, is my opponent trying to get a Dawnblade counter this turn? Do I just need to stop his Dawnblade? Does he have some other attack that's actually the main thing? Like, should I just let this Dawnblade swing in? It's pretty complicated, and a lot of people will mess up against it and give you openings that you can exploit. So that's a pretty good game plan, but let's talk about how I tailor it for specific matchups. So we're going to go right to left here. So this is my sideboard. I have the 3rd copy of the blue Steelblade Shunt. This is usually going to be swapped in instead of the energy potion, instead of one of the energy potions against decks where I think that the potion not blocking is too much of a liability. So that would be against Ninja, against another Warrior, and against Brute. I will typically swap one of my energy potions for a blue Steelblade Shunt. Then I have 3 copies of the red Steelblade Shunt. This one is 1 for 6, which is really strong, but because it's a red instead of a blue, it's nowhere near as efficient at pitching early on in the game. And I'm only going to be playing these in matchups where I want to have like a big, strong defense reaction. Typically, this is a Guardian and Warrior only card, though I would put it in some cases if I knew I was playing against like a 1-turn kill Runeblade or something like that, where I want to have a strong defense reaction set up to stop their big swing. But typically this is only going to be played for me against a Guardian or a Warrior. I have Springboard Somersault. This is a great card. 0 cost, only defends for 2, so you might think this is terrible, but if it's played from Arsenal, it gains +2, so it becomes a 4-cost defense reaction, and it is critically a yellow pitch, meaning that if I draw this on a turn where I'm wanting to be aggressive and don't play it on defense, it's not going to be as bad as like a red Sink Below, which would also be a defense reaction that could potentially come in for 4. So Springboard Somersault is my choice here, because I want to have, like, even when I'm sideboarding in more defense, I want to still have a lot of offense in my deck, and this card having more energy than typical defense reactions that you might run in its slot is going to allow me to have that little bit more aggression, even if I do have a hand where I draw defensive cards. So pretty cool card. Again, not something for every matchup. Typically I'm playing this usually against another Warrior. I am sometimes playing, and I'm playing this against a Brute, and I'm sometimes playing this against a Ninja, and I'm playing this against a Ranger, but I'm not playing this in other situations. And honestly, I'm not sure about Ranger. Ranger is like really bad, so I don't actually know what the best setup is for them. I don't say that to like disrespect Ranger players, but like Ranger is not performing well at present, and as a result, it's not that commonly played, so I don't have as much experience against it as some other classes. And additionally, it's kind of hard to tell like what sort of fine-tuning is most effective against Ranger, simply because you typically have a big advantage anyway. Okay, so that's Springboard Somersault. Remembrance, this is an instant. Shuffle up to 3 action cards from your graveyard into your deck and banish it. Often what you're going to want to do with Remembrance is you're going to want to pitch it early using that yellow pitch, and then later on when the time comes, you're going to have the opportunity to use Remembrance and get some key actions into your deck. Typically you're going to want to use this with some strong attack cards, so you might use this to get your
I don't know. You might use Remembrance to get your Enlightened Strikes and Command and Conquers. You might get your Warriors. You might get your Spoils of War. You're going to want to use this to get strong and threatening cards back into your deck in extended matchups or more fatiguey games. And I do have 2 copies of this. I might run 1 copy of this against a ninja where I thought, this guy might be going for a control, like fatigue build, and I would probably run 2 copies of this against a guardian. These are really kind of a specific counter card for long game fatigue builds. And as a result of that, I'm usually not running them, but they can be essential in the right situation. Next up, we have the red route, or the second copy of route. I don't know why I said the red route. They're all red. Route only comes in red. But this again is going to be something that I'm going to put in if I expect a deck with like some of the stronger defense reactions, like the unmovables or the staunch responses. This is going to be something that I might throw in there, especially if I think the game is going to go long, to kind of buff up my attacks more and give me another thing that's going to threaten them and especially contest those big defense reactions. Again, not so that I play in more matchups, but something that we might see against the Guardian, against the Control Ninja. Then, last but not least, Irena's Prayer. This is a very strong card against a wizard. It is a not very strong card against anyone other than a wizard. It has a similar effect to Ravenous Rabble, where it's going to reveal the top card and its effect will be reduced by that card's pitch, but it's going to allow me to prevent the next X arcane damage, where X is 6 minus the pitch value of the card that I reveal. So in the right circumstance where I am revealing a red, this is actually going to block 5 damage. And if I'm revealing a yellow, it's going to be 4, and against a blue, it's still 3. So when I have these combined with my 2 null rune items, that's going to provide a fair amount of protection against a wizard and allow me to stop on hit effects even from buffed up spells, which is what I want to be doing in that matchup. Even if my opponent does something really big, I might still be able to block with the combination of my Arcane Barrier and Irena's Prayer. Okay, so that's the sideboard overview, and now we're going to talk about the specific matchups. I have all the potential heroes you might face laid out here on the board. So first up, we got Kano the Wizard. So against Kano, it has this ability that allows him to do stuff as instants. It's pretty annoying. It's pretty threatening. So against Kano, what I'm going to try to do is I want to be in a situation where I'm maintaining all my aggression, so I'm keeping most of my aggressive stuff in, but there's one exception. If you note here, Kano starts with 30 life instead of 40. Because he starts at less life, this Scar for a Scar is going to be less effective because it's much less likely that my condition will be enabled where I'm going to get the go again for having less life than my opponent. That's just much less likely to happen against a wizard than it is against other opponents. So against wizard, I'm going to take these 3 Scar for a Scars, take them out of the deck, and then I'm going to take these copies of Irena's Prayer that I was just discussing and slide them into the deck. So -3 Scar for a Scar, +3 Irena's Prayer. That's going to give me that little bit of defense against Arcane that I need, while also removing an attack that is less efficient against this particular type of opponent. And the game plan against Wizard is going to be more aggressive than them and kind of race them, try to keep them on the defensive with all my aggressive stuff. You don't want to be defending too much. The Irena's Prayers and the null rune stuff is just for blocking specific threats. A lot of what I want to do in that matchup is just make them use their stuff to defend against me. So that's the Wizard matchup. Next up, we have Viscera Runeblood, the Rune Blade here. So he has, whenever you play a Runeblade card, if you have played another non-attack action card this turn, create a Rune Chant token. These tokens can come in and ping you for 1 damage, and it's arcane damage, so it's annoying to block. So against Viscera, what I want to do is I want to put on the Null Rune Hood to allow me to block those Rune Chants. Then this layout is actually not bad against Viscera. There are some variations of Viscera that might merit some changes. One thing that I do sometimes is I put in the Springboard Somersaults depending on what I expect to have happen. Or I might throw in, if I thought the opponent was going to do a build where they were doing a few really big attacks, I might put in like 2 of the red shunts in order to try to get one of those set up so that when he does his really big thing, I will have a very strong defense reaction and arsenal against it. But typically the standard deck and the standard gameplay pattern, just being really aggressive and trying to overwhelm them, can be good against Runeblade. Sometimes I'm going to throw in those Springboard Somersaults, and if I knew that the opponent was playing one of the like charge up and huge attack Runeblades, I might put in the Steelblade Shunt as well. Maybe even Remembrance if I thought they were going to play a really controlling long game. But typically I would make no changes, or maybe I would put in some Somersaults only. Next up, we have Bravo Showstopper, the Guardian. So Guardian here, he's going to basically just have a few really big attacks against Guardian. The Guardian is also going to try to often play for a long game. So one thing that I like to do in that matchup is I'm going to throw in all of these, so, or maybe just the red shunts and not the third blue shunt. And I'm going to put in one or both remembrances. So that's going to be, and I'm just going to play with more cards in my deck. I'm not going to cut other cards. I'm just going to play at like 65 or maybe I put all of these in and play at 66 cards. And the reason that I would like to do that is it's going to make it harder for him to fatigue me out, because I just have more cards in deck that I can use as a potential resource, and there's not like specific cards that I think are crucial. Maybe I'm even going to put in the second route as well and play at 66 or 67. It's really an interesting situation there. But I'm going to typically play with a somewhat larger deck against Guardian to increase my resistance to fatigue. I'm going to put in remembrances, and I'm going to put in the red shunts because I need that big defense against Guardian's big attacks. Okay, now we have the Warrior Mirror, Dorinthea Iron Song. We've seen her before. She's very strong. Against a Warrior Mirror, I'm actually going to become a pretty different style of deck to what I do normally. So against a Warrior Mirror, I just take all this defense and I put it into my deck, and I take out one of these potions. And as a result of that, I'm playing at, so I'm adding 7 cards, and I'm removing 1. So I'm playing at 66, and I have a lot of defense relative to what I have normally. And when I'm doing that, I'm trying to use these defense reactions to stop big plays from my opponent, while still throwing out threatening stuff of my own. It really becomes more of a mid-range style of deck instead of just being pure aggression. I'm going to be incorporating more defensive options. If I wanted to cut stuff as well to try to run a leaner deck, the things that I would be focused on cutting would be cards like some of the generic attacks, maybe the Ravenous Rabbles in particular, because I'm going to be adding things that have higher pitch relative to my norm. They're going to get a little bit worse, so maybe I'm going to cut those. Things that block for 2 are not as good to have against Warrior because you want to have a strong defense, so maybe I cut some of that stuff. But usually what I do is I just add these on top of my existing things and then play that way, just cutting the 1 energy potion to remove the number of cards that I have that don't block. Okay. Next up, run our Reckless Rampage, the Brute hero. When you discard a card with 6 or more attack during your action phase, Intimidate. Target hero banishes face down a random card from their hand. At the beginning of the end phase, return all cards banished that way to their owner's hand. So this is a mechanic that is going to remove cards from your hand and remove the number of options that you have to block with. As a result of that, you are going to want to have fewer cards that can't block against a Brute. And so against a Brute, I'm going to do the same change I was discussing earlier, put in the 3rd Steelblade Shunt, remove the 2nd Energy Potion, and often I'm going to be putting these Springboard Somersaults in as well to give me that little bit of extra defense, especially on Arsenal against Brute's attacks. I'm usually not going to put the red shunts in. I think they're overdoing it. So I might do this swap and then play 2 or 3 Springboard Somersaults, play at 62 or 63 cards against a Brute. And one thing to note is that sometimes Brute will play a more control game plan. Remembrance would be a good card in that circumstance, but it's actually not that good a card. And the reason that I say that it's not that good a card is because it can't block, so it's risky to have. Brute has some effects that will get a bonus if you block with a low number of cards. So Barraging Beatdown is the big one, where it's going to give their attack extra stats if you don't block with at least 2 non-equipment cards. So if they do some Intimidates and you only have 2 cards in hand, and they're coming in with a attack that's going to get buffed if you don't block with at least 2 cards, both those cards better be able to block. So, Remembrance might be good against a more controlling Brute, but it's a substantial risk to put in because it doesn't block. Usually I don't run it. Okay, Ninja, Katsu the Wanderer. This guy's going to do combos. This guy's going to try to be aggressive. This is a pretty favored matchup for Warrior. What Ninja is typically going to do his own kind of aggressive stuff, but your aggressive stuff is going to be more dangerous to not block against in a lot of cases because you can build up those Dawnblade counters and become like even stronger. And additionally, a lot of Ninja's best cards block for 2, and because a lot of Ninja's best cards block for 2, their defenses are often going to be weaker and they're going to have trouble stopping your stuff. Against a Ninja, if I think they're going for a more control game plan, I'm going to put in a Remembrance, and I might put in this Remembrance in this route. Often I'm going to remove an energy potion against Ninja and put in that 3rd blue shunt as well. Kind of get myself into that position where, because Ninja has aggressive combos and stuff, again, I don't really want stuff that can't block. So especially if I'm playing Remembrance, I probably don't want to have this 2nd potion in the deck. Just because that's another card that can't block. But overall, Ninja's usually a pretty favored matchup. If they go for a really long game control Ninja, that can be favored against you, but the more typical aggressive Ninjas match up unfavorably with Warrior, and the long game, like, control Ninja has an extraordinarily unfavorable matchup against Mechanologist, and because they have such a bad matchup against Mechanologist, it really creates a situation where that's going to be a risky deck to take to a tournament, given that Mechanologist is one of the top tier decks. So in a way, Dash kind of has Dorinthea's back there, where she's covering me from the threat of the control guardian and the control ninja, because she is so good against those decks. It's going to make me less likely to have to encounter them in a tournament setting. Okay, so that was Ninja. Next up we have Dash, the inventor extraordinaire and mechanologist. So Dash is going to be a very different game than every other deck. The way that Mechanologist works is that she plays items that often are going to stay in permanently and allow her to buff up her pistol and make it even more powerful. So if her pistol doesn't have any items supporting it, it's a terrible weapon. But if she gets a bunch of items that are going to be buffing it, you know, giving it more stats, giving it go-agains, doing stuff like that, it's going to be a very dangerous and powerful weapon. And all of a sudden my emphasis needs to change. So against Dash, my default configuration of this deck is basically an anti-dash configuration, and I just run exactly this stuff. Because the goal against Dash is to try to be extremely aggressive and overwhelm her before she gets set up, or at least do so much damage that once she sets up, she is going to have to be mindful of her life total and can't attack me as aggressively as she'd like. I typically do not want to block very much against Dash. I end up like just eating a lot of damage and trying to be as aggressive as possible and stalling her attempts to set up items, trying to make her defend with stuff and take damage and not have as many resources as she would like to get set up. So I just use the default setup here against Dash, and I try to play really, really aggressively as well. All right, and then last but not least, or no, I'm sorry, I said last but not least, but I was wrong. It's last and least. Azalea the Ranger. This is the worst hero in the game right now. She's extremely bad right now. I'm sorry, Azalea players. You know, no disrespect, dude. But Azalea is in a bad spot. So, Ranger has even worse defense than Ninja, and has worse defensive items than Ninja, and is less threatening than Ninja. Basically, there's like Wide Ranger and Tall Ranger, and Wide Ranger is bad Ninja, and Tall Ranger is bad Guardian. That's my belief, and I know these are like sweeping generalizations, and maybe someone's figured something out that's gonna allow Ranger to really be great, but I'm just not seeing it, man. And so against Ranger, she does have the ability to give attacks dominate, which can allow her to threaten powerful on-hit effects that are going to be difficult to defend against. Against Ranger, I'm going to be using the standard loadout with the skull cap, the bracers, the bolters, and the tunic. And then if she is doing her powerful stuff, I'm going to be using, I'm going to be using some defense there. Typically what I would do against a Ranger is I might put the Springboard Somersaults in. Just to give me some more defense options from Arsenal that can potentially allow me to stop those dominated attacks. But that's really more or less all I'm going to do. And honestly, I'm not even sure that I need to do that, because typically I can just be really aggressive and kill Ranger. But I think it's a prudent choice to try to stop some for on-hit effects. All right, so those were the so that's actually about that. Those are the 8 matchups. So this was the deck overview. Quick summary again. What I'm trying to do is use this stuff that I have over here to buff up my Dawnblade and swing with it. Ideally with a go again from one of these many things, or a Quicken Token, or a Glint, or potentially the Refraction Bolters. And with all that stuff giving me a potential go again, I can throw the Dawnblade and swing at my opponent. And if my opponent is going to block it heavily, I'm ideally going to follow up with one of these attacks, which might catch them off guard. This Scar for a Scar and this Ravenous Rabble I can also play before my other attacks. And same with the E-Strike if I choose to do go again. So I have a bunch of options for like going wide. What I'm really trying to do is, instead of playing a more conventional like old school warrior build where I'm just buffing the Dawnblade as much as possible and swinging like huge, what I'm trying to do is threaten a bunch of different things. The opponent doesn't really know which one I'm doing, and they have to figure out, you know, how am I going to defend against this? So I'm not playing like Sharpened Steel, for instance, which is a card that just buffs up the Dawnblade further, because that can kind of play into the opponent's hand if they have a big attack reaction. What I want to do is do a like smaller mid-level attack with the Dawnblade, ideally with go again, and make the opponent wonder, you know, should I be blocking this or should I be blocking this next thing? And, you know, if they block the Dawnblade attack lightly, try to sneak in with these attack reactions, then attack again to threaten that counter. if they block the Dawnblade heavily, try to come in with one of these attacks afterwards when they might be off guard. That's the basic strategy. Keep them guessing. Mix people up with the multiple Dawnblade swings versus the swings into generics versus the generics first and then swings. Just a lot of stuff you can potentially do. Try to be very aggressive. Try to control the pace of the game. And tempo is often more important than damage. I'm very willing to just take damage. I have the 3 Scar for a Scar and the Arcanite Skullcap are all going to be better if I have less life than my opponent, so I'm fine with taking some damage, getting to lower life. Maybe that's going to actually make me stronger. Maybe it's just going to preserve my options to allow me to be more aggressive, but this deck has worked really well for me. I was with a variation of this, I won the West Coast playtest tournament, and I have also had good results in other online events. I came in second in the ladder, and I played actually a Blitz version of this deck that was a little different and won a Blitz tournament with it some time ago. So this sort of thing has been really cool for me, and I found it very effective to do this type of strategy. Actually, the Blitz one was long enough ago that I was still doing more of the Warriors Valor game plan at that time, so maybe that doesn't count. But regardless, this sort of wide warrior where I'm doing a lot of different threats and making it difficult to determine what I'm doing, it's been really effective. I've been really happy with it. So that's going to do it. This was already a pretty long video, guys. Sorry for going into so much detail on the different cards and why they're in the build, but I thought I would do a fairly comprehensive review of the deck and how it's going to play in different matchups. So shout out to the FaB Foundry where this video is going to be posted. The site has been really good in my opinion. I've bought singles from them before and I've really enjoyed the events that they've put on. Stay tuned for more, as there are going to be more events from FaB Foundry in the future. Including the next iteration of the Playtest League, where this deck or an earlier version of it was very effective. And, we'll see. I think for the next version of the Playtest League, I think I'm going to be, at least early on, I think I'm going to be trying out some different stuff. It's not going to be all Dorinthea all the time. I don't know, I'm thinking maybe playing some Katsu. I'm thinking maybe playing some Dash. There's a lot of stuff that I'm interested in. It's going to be cool to see how that goes. This is what I did for the first one, at least. Did very well for me. And so that's about going to do it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments here. Feel free to also talk to me on Discord if you want. This is, I believe, going to be posted over at FaB Foundry, but I have a channel of my own called TowerNumberNine. If you search for that, you should find it on YouTube or on Twitch. On YouTube, I have videos that I have recorded. Most of them are just going to be VODs from Twitch commentaries that I've uploaded. And on Twitch, I do live streams with either live commentary on games that are currently being played. I just did one earlier with the finals of a tournament that was being played internationally via Tabletop Simulator. But I also just do interesting pickup games and ladder games and other stuff like that. I also do a few videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 5 o'clock p.m. I'm going to be up there streaming my own videos. And those are going to be recordings that I've made of my own gameplay, and I just do the same sort of commentary on those that I would with a tournament game. So check that out on Twitch if you're interested in seeing my commentary on games being played instead of just me sitting here and talking about decks. I also have strategy, kind of written strategy articles over at my blog at TowerNumberNine.com. So all of those things are available. And last but not least, if you do feel like buying some singles or accessories or card sleeves or whatever it is that you're looking for over at FaB Foundry, and you feel like supporting me at the same time, I do have a affiliate link you can use where I will get a small percentage of the sale. That should be posted below or in the video description. But if you would use that, then you would not only support FaB Foundry, which I think is a good store that is not only selling product, but also hosting events and helping grow the community, but you will also support my channel and help me keep making flesh and blood content. So that's going to do it for this, guys. Thanks for tuning in and checking out this video. I know it was a long one, but I wanted to address this stuff in detail. And until next time, this is TowerNumber9 signing off. Thanks, guys.